Welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast with your hosts, Tony Caselnova from DisneyByTheNumbers.com and Parkhopper John from WDWParkhoppers.com. Keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast at all times. And get ready for the Disney Parks Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast. We have a great show for you tonight. Our friend, your friend, everybody's friend, who in my mind is a Disney legend himself, Jim Korkis, who is an internationally respected Disney historian who has written 20 books and hundreds of articles about all things Disney for the past 35 years. In 1995, Jim relocated to Orlando, where he worked for Walt Disney World in a variety of capacities, including entertainment, animation, Disney Institute, Disney University, college and international programs, Disney Cruise Line, Disney Design Group, and marketing. That doesn't even scratch the surface. His original research on Disney history has been used often by the Disney Company, as well as other organizations, including the Disney Family Museum. And we get him tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome your friend and mine, Mr. Jim Korkis.
Gosh! Oh, boy! Come here, Pluto! We're on the show! This is a wonderful... it's going to be a wonderful show because we're going to be talking about my absolute favorite Disney character, which is the original Mickey Mouse of the 30s and 40s, where he really was a reflection of Walt Disney. In fact, in 1974, Walt's widow, Lillian, told Bob Thomas, who is writing Walt Disney An American Original, that she really couldn't watch those cartoons because they just reminded her so much of Walt. You know, Disney animator and nine-old man Frank Thomas, who a lot of the younger folks today probably don't know, it told me that Walt was Mickey and Mickey was Walt, and his friend, animator Ollie Johnson, said, Mickey did everything that Walt wanted to do as a kid, rescue princesses and defeat bullies and all of that, and that Walt basically told them that he saw Mickey as roughly about a 10-year-old boy, but with the capabilities of a 14 or 15-year-old. And we certainly see that in those cartoons. And Walt said that he had Mickey wear those big yellow shoes because he wanted it to seem like a young boy dressing up in his father's shoes. Actually, the reason for the shoes was that Mickey's feet look like, a mouse's foot with those scraggly little claws. So once you put him in the shoe, you remove him from being a mouse. And if you look at those early cartoons with Minnie, she's wearing oversized high heels as well. So they're like these kids, dressed up. And of course, this year we just celebrated Mickey's 89th birthday, with his 90th coming up in 2018. But that becomes very problematic for the Disney Company because, starting in 2003, Disney decided that they would not celebrate Mickey's birthday because they felt, and I talked with a Disney executive about that, they felt that young kids were so stupid that if you gave him an age, he would seem just old. And kids didn't like things that were old. And so, for his 75th birthday, you're not celebrating Mickey's 75th birthday. You're celebrating 75 years with Mickey, which to me makes absolutely no sense because, for crying out loud, if you're celebrating 75 years with Mickey, he's got to be at least 75 years old. But, the Disney company has always had a challenge with Mickey's birthday, because now we all accept, oh yes, Mickey's birthday is November 18th, 1928. And we see that in newspapers and other media. And, the fun fact for today, this is actually Mickey Mouse's birthday. Well, that was not Mickey Mouse's birthday until Disney archivist Dave Smith established it in 1978. And the reason for establishing that as the date is because up until then, the Disney company celebrated Mickey's birthday any date between September and late November in order to either promote the newest film that was being released, or to encourage theaters to hold Mickey Mouse birthday parties and rent, the Mickey Mouse shorts, because after the end of summer and before the holiday season began, there was a lull. There was a lull at Disneyland. There was a lull at the movie theaters because kids were in school. So you wanted to, boost up all of that, And so, again, today we want to be consistent, but, back in the day it was, what is going to work, for Mickey's third birthday, the Los Angeles Times phoned the Disney studio to confirm, what the date was so that they could do that. And so the Disney studio affirmed that Mickey's birthday was October 25th. It was October 25th. So in 1931, it was celebrated on October 25th. Now, the interesting thing is a year later in 1932, for Mickey's fourth birthday, it was celebrated on October 1st. And so there were parties and radio shows and things like that. And so you're going, wait a minute, and in fact, on October 1st, Walt even attended a Mickey Mouse birthday party at the Coconut Grove nightclub, which was in the old Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and he cut, Mickey's birthday cake. But for Mickey's fifth birthday, it was celebrated on September 30th in 1933. And again, that was all connected with, my gosh, we want to promote something. And so some people are saying, okay, so why are they picking, September? Was that when Plane Crazy was released? Or, because we know Steamboat Willie was released in November. Well, Ub Iwerks actually began working on Plane Crazy, around the last week of April, first week of May. So that would seem like, oh, well, that should be Mickey's birthday. But again, that's not going to generate any additional attendance to movie theaters. And so my best guess of why September was often used, because, Mickey's seventh birthday was celebrated September 28th. It was considered his Mickey's lucky seventh birthday, was that Walt had applied for a trademark on Mickey Mouse, and that wasn't granted until September. And so the Disney studio was probably using that as, well, Mickey is officially born because now he is, officially trademarked. But it's anybody's guess. In 1938 they celebrated it on September 27th. In 1949 you're back to October 1st. And so it's a tough thing. And it was like, well, it didn't make any difference, and we can say whatever we want because, who's going to follow up on any of this stuff for this to happen?
Right.
And John Hench, of course, a lot of people remember that he did Mickey's 25th birthday portrait in 1953. John Hench told me that he went to Walt and he said, "Look, Mickey is, the richest mouse in the world. He's the most recognized mouse in the world. I'm going to give him, long pants because that's just respectful." And Walt says, "No, we're going to go with the short pants." And John says, "Why do you want the short pants?" And Walt said, "I'll tell you why I want the short pants. I like those short pants." And so when Walt tells you something like that, you do it. And here's something that only listeners here will know. Everybody knows that famous 25th portrait of Mickey there in the office. And actually, a lot of the things in the office were things that John copied from his own office, So some of the things you see there, like the hi-fi equipment and the bookcase and all that's from John Hench's own house. But here's something that people don't realize: for Mickey's 21st birthday, John actually painted a Mickey Mouse birthday portrait. Mickey standing in front of blue curtains. This was for Collier's magazine. And, again, one of those magazines that have gone the way of the dodo bird. I remember growing up and there were tons of magazines, that we got at the house. Look magazine and Life magazine and all of these. And none of those, of course, exist anymore at all. So did you guys even realize that Mickey's birthday was just all over the map for my gosh, for 50 years? For 50 years, you could have picked almost any day between September and late November, and that might have been Mickey's birthday.
I know they kind of struggle with it because you mentioned the age thing, but I always thought that rather than calling it a birthday, they should have called it like an anniversary. It's Mickey's 20th anniversary, 25th anniversary, not his birthday. And I think that would have kept kids away from the age thing that Mickey is, aging.
Well, I got called out on that many, many years ago, and I got brought to school and taught. I was describing Disneyland's birthday, and somebody pulled me to task, and they were absolutely right. They said, people have birthdays, things have anniversaries. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're not celebrating Disneyland's birthday, we're celebrating Disneyland's anniversary.
Right.
And but I think of Mickey as real. Walt certainly thought of Mickey as real. So yeah. I would think that's a birthday. When people ask me, mm-hmm. I say Mickey is timeless.
Yeah.
He's sort of, even though he may be performing in like those modern cartoons on the Disney Channel, even though he's performing in modern times, mm-hmm. I think he's stuck in a particular era where he's timeless. Very much like a Sherlock Holmes. A fictional character that is sort of frozen in time. But as I said, Dave Smith came on board in 1970, and one of the first things he had to do was, okay, let's determine a birthday for Mickey Mouse because, we really want to merchandise this because Mickey's heading to his 50th, in 1978. And so, it was a lot harder in those days without the internet and some of these things. So Dave had to go, and he actually pulled out a program from the Colony Theater in New York that was the program for November 18th, where it listed Steamboat Willie, and so Dave's feeling, and I agree with him 100%, was this was really the first. The release of Steamboat Willie was really the first public presentation of Mickey Mouse. Plain Crazy had run, for a couple of days in a local theater in Los Angeles, so they could gauge reaction and all that. But again, there was no impact. Steamboat Willie just transformed the world. It just came at the right time, at the right place, and it cost almost $5,000 to make, which was a fortune in those days. That included all the sound recording and the messed up sound recording and all that, and so that was determined as that is going to be Mickey's birthday. And so, Disney promoted it by having Ward Kimball go on a train to 57 cities, to promote Mickey Mouse. And they tossed out buttons, and Ward told me that people just went crazy. They were jumping over each other, just to scramble to get these buttons, as the train was pulling out of the station, And the Disney Archives actually has 7 huge scrapbooks of material, photos and newspaper clippings and all of that from that birthday event. And that was also the year 78, when Mickey got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and that made him the first cartoon character, to ever get that. And there was a special birthday song written for Mickey. The whole world wants to wish you happy birthday, Mickey Mouse. And I wonder how many of your listeners right now are going, wait a minute, I remember that song,
Do you know who wrote that song, Jim?
Oh gosh, not off the top of my head.
Senator Sherman.
And again, that's the tough thing being Jim Korkis, because you're the fastest gun in town. So everybody thinks, you have this automatic Rolodex, in your head that you'll pull these things up. But I remember, I used to be so cheeky. I remember the first time I knew something that Dave Smith didn't, and I brought it up to him, for one of those nya moments, and Dave is really cool. Dave, and he looked at me and he goes, nobody can know everything, especially about Disney. And then, which is a line I've used many times. And Dave literally told me that one of the reasons he wrote books like Disney A to Z, right, is so that he didn't have to remember all this stuff. He could just look it up in the book. Wow. Because when he started the archives, he had 3 huge files on his desk, because this was the information that most people requested. One of them was, all of the Disney films, the cartoons, things like that, and the date they were released, and that. Another file was on Disneyland attractions. When did a certain attraction open or close? And then the third was names of people who worked at the Disney studio. over the years. And, of course, it was an incomplete list, but oftentimes Dave would get these questions. I had an aunt on my mother's side who said she worked at Disney, in the 40s. Did she?
Right.
How can you answer any of that? So I can't answer who wrote the song, but I love the song. And and there was even a special TV episode run that year on the Disney Wonderful World of Disney show. Where you have Johnny Carson and Jonathan Winters, and oh my gosh, I miss Jonathan Winters doing that, and was such a huge success that 10 years later, for Mickey's 60th, they go all out. They go even bigger because now there's an official birthday for Mickey Mouse. So you can center everything around that. You can have events and all, leading up to that date. So, there was another special TV show, and again, since this is 1988, Roger Rabbit is the big draw. So basically, the concept of the special is that Mickey Mouse is missing, and so Roger Rabbit goes out in search of Mickey Mouse. Because again, at that point, Disney is really trying to leverage Roger Rabbit because they were already planning a sequel. And there were two versions of the sequel. One was going to be Who Discovered Roger Rabbit, where basically Roger Rabbit is raised as a small town rabbit by a human foster family, and he goes to Broadway, to make his theatrical debut, and he then gets recognized for his talent, and so he's brought out to Hollywood. And then the other sequel that they were working on was called Toon Platoon, which would have been all of the cartoon characters serving in World War II. But a lot of people forget that Steven Spielberg and Amblin Entertainment own half of Roger Rabbit, and half of the Roger Rabbit characters, like Jessica. So in order for any decision to be made, basically not only does Disney have to agree, but Spielberg has to agree. And that's one of the reasons why we stopped seeing Roger Rabbit shorts being made. But basically, Steven Spielberg, especially after Schindler's List, did not want to do any project that featured Nazis or featured them in as comical villains. So that, well, we went off that road. We went off that tangent there. You guys are supposed to pull me back into the main road here. Anyway, for Mickey's birthday, and you guys are very parks oriented, that as part of Mickey's 60th birthday celebration, they opened Mickey's Birthday Land at Walt Disney World. That nice little temporary land that was only supposed to be there for about a year and a half. It got thrown together in about 6 months or less. A bunch of birthday tents and all that, and it was so popular because we always joke. What are the questions that guests ask at a Disney theme park? And at Walt Disney World, the second most popular question that was asked was, what time is the 3:00 parade? And I know, the first time I heard that, I just broke out laughing and say, look, we've got a watch shop on Main Street. Why don't you just go in there? And when I worked in guest relations, it was explained to me that people ask that question because sometimes they use it just to start a conversation. Sometimes they're using it because those of us who go to the parks, we know that even though it says a 3 o'clock parade, it's stepping off, back there in Frontierland. So what time is it going to hit Main Street,
Right.
So what time is the 3 o'clock parade? Or they're going, oh my gosh, it rained earlier today, and we know that Disney, goes with safety and all of that. They may need to clean the streets and all of that. What time is the 3 o'clock parade? Has it been delayed and all that? So that gave me a better appreciation for that. But the number one question asked at Walt Disney World starting in 1971, the number one question was, where's Mickey Mouse? People wanted to meet Mickey Mouse. And it's hard for people who visited the park today to realize that once upon a time, the characters just wandered around the park, and it wasn't like there was a schedule. It was serendipity. It was something that had started at Disneyland. It was one of those plus moments that you just stumble across,
You didn't know where they were coming from and what time they were going to be there or who it was going to be. It was just random.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with the opening of Mickey's Birthday Land, there was a specific location and a specific time where you could go and get Mickey's autograph. You could get your picture with Mickey and all that. So that's why it evolved into Starland and then later Mickey's Toontown Fair. Now for Mickey's 60th, Disney even produced a 68-page slick magazine called Mickey is 60. And the big draw for that magazine is they had that fake animation cell in there of Mickey from the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And, I talked with some people just recently, and they're just clueless about how excited people were to collect cells and how expensive those were and all of that. And I said, look, you're the same people who are collecting, Vinylmation here, and I said I had friends who collected Disney Beanie Babies, thinking it was going to be their 401k plan, and nowadays you can't even give them away to the Salvation Army or Goodwill, So a Disney collectible is only worth what it's worth to you emotionally or what it's worth to somebody else. I have friends who collect pins, and they come up, this pin is worth $35. It's worth $45. I said, I'll give you $1 for it. I said, it's worth $1 to me. But that's about it.
That's very true.
And they look at me as if I'm insane and I have two heads. But anyway, so the Mickey is 60 magazine went out there. In fact, some of you may still have it, or you can pick it up on eBay, probably very cheaply. And, people get so excited about hidden Mickeys, and we can talk about hidden Mickeys and how that developed. But hidden Mickeys, but there's a hidden thing in the Mickey is 60 magazine. If you flip to page 35 and look at the bottom, they had Mickey is 60, Mickey is 60. And so somebody had a sense of humor. At the bottom of page 35, it says, Mickey is sexy. And that upset the Disney company when that came out so much that they almost pulled the entire magazine there. And for the 60th, that was the debut of Air Force One. Ooh. How many people remember the days of hot air balloons? And this was the one in the shape of Mickey's head.
Yes.
And it toured the United States. Did you guys ever get a chance to see that?
No, but I have a publicity photo of that balloon over the Niagara Falls.
Oh, see, there you go. And that was so popular that Disney then later did one, with the castle. They did one of Donald Duck's head and all of that. And it's something that Jack Lindquist did. And Jack Lindquist, boy, that guy was just filled with pixie dust. And we lost him, several months ago, which was a huge loss. Fortunately, he wrote a book called "In Service to the Mouse" about some of the things, some of his anecdotes and memories. But he had more, and in fact, he was at least halfway through a second book, when he passed away. So I hope somebody will gather those notes and either release it as partially finished or get some people who knew Jack and fill those things in. But one of the things Jack did, because Jack was vice president for creative marketing for a long while. Later, he became president of Disneyland. In Iowa, in Sheffield, Iowa, he arranged for a 520-acre cornfield to be planted in the shape of Mickey Mouse's head. So when you were flying over in an airplane, you could see Mickey Mouse's head, and it was meant to be a birthday card to Mickey from Minnie. Wow. And so Jack had to do all the things about, okay, what are the most common flight routes, and, so as many planes as possible would fly over that and see, Mickey's head. And in fact, there was a special logo created for Mickey's birthday, So, in the old days, Disney, went pretty big. We were talking about Mickey's 75th in 2003. I wonder how many people saw the promotion of. They made 75 Mickey Mouse statues that each stood 6 feet tall and each weighed 700 pounds. And they had, celebrities like Tom Hanks and John Travolta and Ben Affleck and a bunch of these others paint on these statues. And those were displayed at Walt Disney World for a long while, and then they went on tour, around the United States to, I think it was about a dozen cities, and this was all sponsored by Coca-Cola. And after the tour, the statues were auctioned off, and the proceeds went to, whatever charity the individual artist, wanted that to go to. And in fact, there was even merchandise where those 75, I don't know if all 75, but some of the 75 statues were recreated as these little figurines. Do you guys remember that? Do you remember that big promotion?
I absolutely do. I remember seeing one in New York City because I was living in New Jersey at the time. But is there not one still, Jim, at the Shades of Green? Is that part of that? Is that part of the 75th?
Yep.
Yeah. So you can visit one still at the Shades of Green resort.
and Shades of Green, you could devote an entire show to that. So
yeah.
But that's his 75th.
Right.
10 years later, when you get to the 85th, Disney Company does nothing to celebrate Mickey's birthday. In the past, there was a special comic book from Dell Comics. There was, special buttons and pins. And this year, it was kind of sad because I had friends who were out here from Illinois. And so, of course, when friends come in, they always want to do two things. They want to take me out to eat, even though it does not look like I am starving at all. They want to take me out to eat and feed me up with food, and then they also want to take me to the park. They want to have Jim Korkis with them as they're walking through the park. And so we went on Mickey's birthday to the Magic Kingdom, and it's like there's nothing here. There was some birthday cake, but you had to buy the birthday cake. There was a button, and the button has the newly designed Mickey, the one that's on the Disney Channel and the one that's going to be featured in the Mickey's Runaway Railroad at Disney Hollywood studios there. Because again, that's the Mickey that most kids today recognize as Mickey. His cartoons are no longer 7 minutes long; they're 3 minutes long.
Right.
You know, and they don't even use the official voice of Mickey Mouse. They bring in another actor because they wanted an edgier voice for Mickey.
Yeah.
And you know, oh my gosh.
And not to go off on a tangent, Jim, but why in these new modern Disney Channel cartoons is Mickey and Minnie like the pie eye and not the regular, you know, eye kind of Mickey that we see?
You know, that's interesting. And what I've been told is because they want to reference, you know, those 30s cartoons where Mickey was, you know, cool, where Mickey was the adventurer. He was not a corporate icon. He was not the suburban family man with you know, with a house and mowing the lawn and all that. They wanted the adventurous Mickey. Now, for the Pie Eyes, it's interesting about that because, of course, Mickey started off with just, you know, these black pupils. Yeah. But what happened is you couldn't tell where Mickey was looking. You know, so if you take a look at a film like Band Concert, where Mickey, as the conductor, has to be looking, you know, is facing straight towards the band, but needs to look, you know, to the right and the left, the eyes just sort of float to the right and the left, and it's just, especially when you see it on a big movie screen, it's very queasy, and especially in advertisements, you have Mickey standing there next to, you know, the product. You want Mickey looking at the product. And so they came up with Pie Eyes, which again we refer to as that oval and then a triangular slice being pulled out. So it's like a pie with a slice that is pulled out. That triangle is supposed to be a highlight. And so that pie slice has to be the same in both eyes because the light is coming down and reflecting off of the eye, but that little point is pointing in the direction where Mickey needs to look. And so you start to see that in some of the cartoons when they needed that, but again, that wasn't sufficient. So in 1939, you have Ward Kimball and Fred Moore come up with Mickey with pupilled eyes, just like the other characters, because it gave them more freedom and more expression. But for the Disney Channel cartoons, they wanted to try and capture that spirit, that zeitgeist of the 30s cartoons, where, you know, Mickey is the adventurer, you know. Mickey is sassy, you know, because the Disney company, starting in the 30s, were getting letters from parents complaining, you know, that Mickey Mouse was setting a bad role model, you know, for kids. And so that's why Donald Duck started to become more popular, because a lot of times Mickey Mouse cartoons were being developed, and if Mickey was starting to get a little too rough, they would just shift it over to a Donald Duck cartoon. Because Donald Duck could be as rough as he wanted to be, because everybody knew that Donald was going to get his comeuppance. You never wanted Mickey Mouse, right, you know, to get his comeuppance. And Mickey always had, you know, to be the hero. You know, if he's battling Pete, you know, Pete has to make the first move. You know, Mickey can't instigate, you know, right, the action. Pete has to irritate Mickey or harass Minnie or whatever to give Mickey a chance to respond, and Mickey has to respond cleanly. He can't go up, you know, behind Pete and whack him on the top of the head with a 2x4. That's not Mickey Mouse. You know, and in fact, Walt was very proprietary about Mickey Mouse. You know, oftentimes, they would pitch him stories, and Walt would laugh, and he goes, "Yeah, Mickey wouldn't do that." And if Walt said that, that's it, boy. You just don't. Once Walt said no, that's it. You could not argue him out of that.
Right.
That was it.
Jim, are there written or unwritten rules of what, say, Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse can or cannot do or should not do while on screen? I'm using my air quotes.
Well, nowadays there are.
Okay.
In fact, I was just talking to some of my friends in merchandise, and Mickey is supposedly in merchandise no longer allowed to, hold out his hand, to point to something, because that's showing off, and Mickey is not supposed to be a show-off. Back in the 30s and 40s, they had a character guide for Mickey and Minnie and Donald, Goofy, Pluto, which basically were done by the what do I want to say? Done by the primary animators for them. So somebody like Fred Moore did up the one for Mickey Mouse, and he talked, not just about how do you draw Mickey, but also the fact that let's see if I can remember offhand. Moore gave this lecture like in 1939, and he said in effect, Mickey's not a clown. He's not stupid or idiotic.
Right.
The comedy comes from the situation, not from, Mickey himself. And, in some adventures he can act like an adult if he needs to. Although that's the excuse they use of why Mickey and Minnie are not officially married, because that would be an adult thing to do, and kids would see that as an adult thing. And Mickey and Minnie are not adults.
Right.
Although in real life, Wayne Allwine, who is the voice of Mickey Mouse, was married to Russi Taylor, who was the voice of Minnie Mouse. So for a long time there, Mickey and Minnie really were married in real life. It's interesting that Walt, always thought that they were married, because Walt, of course, a conservative guy, and you can't be dating this woman for 85 years and not marry her, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So Walt thought of them, in the sense of like George Burns and Gracie Allen, or Jack Benny and Mary Livingston, who on the radio and in films, often played single people, but they were married in real life. They were just playing a part. That was one of the things that really set Mickey apart from other characters, was that, look at the very first film that was released widely, Steamboat Willie. It's not called Steamboat Mickey, it's called Steamboat Willie, because Walt said, we're not seeing the adventures of Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is like a Clark Gable or something. He is playing a part. And even though that part may be similar to his personality, he's an actor. And so that he's playing the part of Willie. He's playing the part of Steamboat Willie. He isn't Steamboat Willie. He's Mickey Mouse.
Right.
Basically, Walt even took out ads in trade papers. In trade papers, as an actor, you put in your picture and your contact information, like your agent, and In those days, you also put in things like, your height and things like that, so that, casting agents could take a look and go, oh, yeah, that's the type of person I want.
Right.
And so put Mickey Mouse in in ads in these trade papers, with of course Walt as the agent that you had to contact to use it.
Wow.
But the thing that set Mickey Mouse apart from Bugs Bunny or Woody Woodpecker or any of these others was basically that Mickey is an actor, and so once the cartoon finishes, he goes back home.
Right.
And in those days, that was back home to Burbank or Hollywood. In fact, Mickey would receive fan mail, just addressed Mickey Mouse Hollywood, and it would get, delivered.
Wow.
In 1933, Luella Parsons revealed that during that year, Mickey received 800,000 fan letters, which was more than any other actor in the United States, in Hollywood, that was performing. I was fortunate enough, and again, this is one of the reasons that I write these books, I tell stories, I go on the podcast and all this, is I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up at a time where I had access, to a lot of the animators and Imagineers and asked them questions, and unfortunately, a lot of these folks are no longer around, to tell their stories. And so I feel a real obligation as being a caretaker and share these stories out there.
Right.
And Alice Davis, who was the wife of Mark Davis, the terrific animator, did Tinkerbell and all of that, and park attractions like Haunted Mansion, all of that. We tend to forget that these people had lives, and especially these artists, would go traveling. Ken Anderson would go to Africa, whatever, and study, different art, which they would apply to their own. And so Alice told me one time, she and Mark Davis went to this very obscure area of New Guinea. And because they were looking, for some tribal art and things like this. And they went to an area that Europeans, white folks, had never been to before. And she said, and the guide took them, and these were people who had never seen, outsiders before. And she said, as they approached the village, this little boy ran out wearing nothing but a T-shirt, and on the T-shirt was Mickey Mouse.
Wow. That's crazy.
Well, it is. It is. The impact. Mickey Mouse is probably one of the most recognized figures in the world. In the Belgian Congo, Time magazine in the 40s had this picture of this witch doctor who was hugely popular because the mask that he was using was a homemade mask of Mickey Mouse.
Huh, wow.
And so people were going there because they thought, oh my gosh, Douglas Fairbanks Senior told Walt about the story about how he went to South Sea Islands, and they found themselves surrounded by these headhunters, and the reason they were able to keep their heads is that Fairbanks had brought a 16-millimeter movie projector, and his wife, Mary Pickford, huge Mickey Mouse fan. And so they showed Mickey Mouse cartoons.
Wow.
And so the headhunters enjoyed it so much. that they allowed them to move on.
Yeah, if you got to show a movie to keep your head, you got to do what you got to do.
That's right.
And so, well, what was it? 57 when Dr. Tom Dooley of the Medical International Cooperation Organization, Medico, they couldn't get patients. They were anchored off the Southeast Asian coast. They couldn't get patients, to come in and get free examinations and treatment and vaccinations and all of that. And they got permission. This is 57. They got permission from Walt to paint a picture of Mickey Mouse on the side of the ship, and suddenly everybody came on. Everybody was happily boarding the ship.
Wow.
They just recognized something about Mickey Mouse.
Wow.
And we have that same effect. When we go to the parks, when we go to Disneyland or we go to the Magic Kingdom, the very first thing you see is the face of Mickey Mouse, the floral Mickey, which is called floral Mickey today, but originally was just called the Mickey Mouse planter. And Bill Evans, who is the landscaper, told me that was done very specifically. He said, take a look at that face. He said it was designed so it would look exactly like the title card in Mickey Mouse short cartoons, theatrical cartoons. Because, again, this is a theater, and this is the movie that is playing is a Disney movie. And so you're going through there, and in this, in the breezeways there, that's you're entering from the lobby, and you're seeing coming attraction posters. You're seeing coming attraction posters of what you are going to be experiencing, in this theater experience. But yes, right out front, they're telling you it's a Disney cartoon.
Right.
You're going to be experiencing, and they change out that planter about 8 times a year, sometimes 9.
Right.
And it takes 4,500 plants to make the Mickey. And of course, you've probably seen too that sometimes they'll change it seasonally, for Halloween or Christmas or all of that. But Disneyland was supposed to be Mickey Mouse Park. It actually started with Walt getting all these requests from people that they wanted to come to Hollywood and they wanted to meet Mickey Mouse.
Wow.
And Walt said there's nothing but these grumpy old animators, hunched over these desks, sometimes reaching into their drawers to pull out a flask every now and then, That's not something for somebody to see. And so Walt's first concept of a Mickey Mouse park was actually just that. It was going to be a park that would have statues of Mickey and some of the animated characters, and there would be picnic tables. And then, of course, Walt, of course, always thinking larger, always whatever, that expanded into, well, we'll have a train and we'll have an Old West, and then again it expands, into Disneyland, and where you can get your mouse ears, which right. Of course were designed by Roy Williams, the big Musketeer, and he took the gag from a 1930s Mickey cartoon, Carnival Kid, where Mickey tips his ears like a hat, to Minnie. And even that wasn't an original gag. That gag had actually been done in an early Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoon that Disney produced. Disney would reuse gags because in those days, you saw the cartoon in the theater, and then once it was gone, that was it. Unless they re-released the cartoon, you never saw that cartoon again.
Yep.
So you could reuse the gags if it worked well for the audience. And back there in 55, it cost you 69 cents for Mickey Mouse ears.
Wow.
And they were very simple. They were just the black felt with the M on front, and the plastic ears on the side there. And it was Walt who doesn't get enough credit for being the great marketer that he is. It came up with, instead of the M, you're going to put the image of Mickey Mouse on the front of that, and also the name Disneyland on there. So, you've got to have the Disneyland ears. And now, they become so elaborate, you can, make customized ears, and ears that light up, and different colors, and all of that, So Mickey is still very much alive, especially, as a presence in the parks. And but Roy Disney, his brother Roy Disney, and the Disney executives were very worried about Disneyland. So they didn't want Walt to use too much of Mickey Mouse or too much of the major characters, because if the thing went belly up, which everybody was expecting it to do, that would affect the characters. Yeah. And so that's why, when Disneyland opened in 1955, you see the emphasis on Tinkerbell and Jiminy Cricket, because those were minor characters. So if things went south with Disneyland, it wouldn't take Mickey in the game with it. Right. It'd just take, these minor supporting characters with it. It wasn't until 1971 that there was the Mickey Mouse attraction, Mickey Mouse Revue at Walt Disney World, where Mickey is conducting an orchestra, audio animatronic, Mickey conducting this orchestra with, different audio animatronic figures of some of the greatest songs from the Disney animated catalog. Roy Disney said, this is the type of attraction we should be doing. And then that, of course, went to Tokyo, and then closed something like 2009 or whatever there. And but there were plans for other, Mickey Mouse attractions. We're looking at this attraction coming into the studios, but Ward Kimball came up with a couple of ideas for Mickey Mouse themed attractions that came very, very close. In 1976, he sketched out and did all the work for a dark ride called Mickey's Madhouse. And so this would be a Wild Mouse coaster. And for those who don't know what a Wild Mouse coaster is, it's a traditional amusement park ride. Disney uses it at Primeval Whirl, at Animal Kingdom, where you're on there and it goes back and forth and twirls around, and you think you're going to fall off the edge and all that. So this would be in an enclosed building, and basically you would have found yourself trapped in an early black and white Mickey Mouse animated cartoon as your vehicle, is swirling back and forth and going around. And then in the 80s, when Epcot was going to have a movie pavilion, which was going to be right between the Imagination Pavilion and the Land Pavilion. It was going to be this huge building, but it was going to be painted like the sky. So it almost looked like it just disappeared, and the entrance was a, theater marquee entrance. And you went in, and part of it was going to have an attraction called Great Movie Moments, which later developed into the Great Movie Ride. But the other thing was going to be Mickey's Movie Land. And again, that's you're on a ride vehicle, and what you're doing, you're in an Omnimover, actually, an Omnimover, because they could use that to control your vision. And in fact, when Omnimovers were created, it was supposed to be like a living camera. That's why it's that egg shape, because it blocks your view on the sides, because it curves around, and it curves around over the top. So it limits, wherever it's pointing, that's what you're looking at. You don't have to worry about guests looking all over the place. And also because of that shape, you're getting better sound quality. So you can actually hear, there's some Disney ride vehicles that are on, and I can't make out some of the things that are being said. But I'm just an old, grumpy old man. And anyway, you're going in this Mickey's Movie Land, and it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek, behind-the-scenes process of making a Mickey Mouse cartoon. And, Ward had boxes and boxes of this material, and then when he passed away, his wife just auctioned all of it off on eBay. So I don't know. I'm assuming the Disney company still has copies of that material, but the originals that Ward had, including memos back and forth to different departments and possible budgets and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
that's in somebody's private collection. And again, that's one of the reasons that I try to share as much of this information as possible, because if this is hidden away,
who's going to know?
What good does it do anybody? And if you share the few bits that you have, Disney history is like this huge jigsaw puzzle. If you share a couple of the bits and pieces you have, maybe somebody else comes out of hiding and they have a couple of pieces, and that puts it together so you can see, oh my gosh, that's not a sky, that's actually an ocean, and that's fish, that's not birds that are flying. Okay, yeah. Let me get my grumpy old man cane, wave it in the air. Rah, 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 rah. Get those kids off my lawn. That music's too loud. I can't understand those lyrics. Rah, 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 rah. But and that's what we have to do. And I've tried to do that. And if people are fascinated by some of this hot air I've been spewing for the last hour, I did write a book called The Book of Mouse.
Nice.
A celebration of Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse. And I tried to put in it everything I could about Mickey Mouse, including, an annotated filmography of every Mickey Mouse cartoon, theatrically and on TV and all of that. And, I talk about why Mickey Mouse wears white gloves and the eyes change and the birthday stuff and Mickey Mouse's voice and all of that. And so that's available at, Amazon.com and themeparkpress.com. And so if you're a huge Mickey fan, this might be something you might want to ask Santa to get you. And if you are a good Disney fan, you already have my book, so you need to ask Santa for something else. And so you might want to ask him about my latest book, which is called Call Me Walt, Everything You Never Knew About Walt Disney. And, because one of the things that irritated me was that I've got like a dozen or 24 biographies of Walt Disney on my shelves. And, some of them are from foreign countries as well, too. But the one thing they all have in common is they all define Walt through the accomplishments that he made. And so if you talk to people, you go, oh, yeah, Walt Disney, he created Mickey Mouse and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first Technicolor animated feature, and Disneyland and audio animatronics. None of those are mentioned in my book. I cover Walt as a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a grandfather. And so questions that you have, how tall was Walt? Well, I found the answer on Walt's 1965 passport. How much did Walt weigh? What were his hobbies? And you're going to say, oh, well, I know those. He liked miniatures and railroads, and, well, I have a whole chapter devoted to lawn bowling. So when Walt was working on Mary Poppins and Cal Arts and Mineral King and the Florida Project and all of that, what was he doing in his spare time? He was lawn bowling.
Wow.
At his house in Palm Springs and also at the Beverly Hills Club. In fact, they have an annual Walt Disney lawn bowling tournament with a perpetual trophy that features Walt's four lawn bowls. That's what the balls are called, or bowls. On there, and it's got a little gold statue of Mickey Mouse on the top of the thing, and the whole. And he took in '64. He took his team out to back east for a tournament, and he talked to some of them about taking him to Australia for a tournament. And I'll bet very few people know oh my gosh, he was a lawn bowler. Wow. And it covers things like what he ate, where he got his clothes, what clothes he liked, how the clothes changed, what different cars did he drive during that, his pets. So everybody usually knows his dogs, but he also had cats. And in fact, one of the tragic stories I ran across was he had a little black cat called Manxie. And Manxie fell asleep in the truck of the gardener who was coming to do the work at the Holmby Hills home, on Carrollwood Drive, because Walt didn't want to do gardening. It was one of the few fights he really got into with his wife. And it was, Walt said, I am not going to do anything on the lawn. I did enough of that as a kid. I'm not going to do that now. So anyway, the cat, she fell asleep. The gardener, pulled away and was driving, and the cat woke up and was disoriented and jumped out of the truck in traffic and just was never seen again.
Wow.
And Walt was very upset about that. Where else are you going to read those stories?
No.
And I also put in 12 chapters debunking the most common Walt myths, that Walt was frozen.
Right.
I talked to Bob Nelson, who ran the only cryogenics facility in the world at the time that Walt died. And he said, no, he said, boy, we would have loved to have had, Walt Disney. He says, no, but he was cremated. And he says, look, use common sense. When he died, they left him in the hospital bed for a couple of hours so that the family could come and say their goodbyes. And I know that is true.
Yeah.
And he said, in cryogenics, especially in those days, you would have to freeze the person immediately after they died, or even just before they died.
Yeah.
For that to happen. It was months later that the first person was cryogenically frozen. And Walt's death certificate is out there, and so I tracked down the embalmer because he has his license number and the seal and the whole bit. And he goes, no, Walt was cremated. Those were his wishes, and he didn't want people to attend the funeral. And so I debunked that. I debunked that Walt was anti-Semitic. For crying out loud, he had people like Marty Sklar and the Sherman brothers and Kay Kamen, who was in charge of merchant. All of these people, were Jewish, and they had positions of great authority at the Disney studio. And whenever possible, I had them, give me a quote, which basically said, we never heard Walt, say anything about Jew. In fact, he was given the B'nai B'rith Man of the Year award, and that's the oldest Jewish organization in existence, and they do extensive background checks before they give that award to anyone. Now, granted, there were anti-Semitic people who worked at Disney. There were racist people who worked at Disney. Floyd Norman, who wrote the foreword for the book, shared with me some wonderful stories. In fact, one about Claude Wilson, which I'll tell you in just a sec. But he said, Walt hired me as an animator. He said if other black animators had applied, he would have hired them, but nobody did. And he said he promoted me to the story department, which is the highest status level there at the Disney studio when Walt was alive. That was up on the third floor where Walt's office was, you know. Right. That was a big deal. And Floyd told me, you know, I was just a young kid, you know, so Walt was more like a grandfather. He said, but at the studio they had a black janitor by the name of Claude Wilson. And he said janitors are pretty much invisible, you know. They go into offices and they clean up and people just ignore them. They just don't pay any attention. And so a janitor often overhears all sorts of things, you know, uncensored conversations. And he said Claude said he never heard Walt use any racist comments and none of the other people talking about, oh, well, Walt said da-da-da-da-da, you know. And Claude moonlighted as a bartender at Walt's parties at the Carrollwood Drive home. And Floyd told me Claude had nothing but, you know, exemplary things to say about Walt and how Walt treated. And he said these conversations I had with Claude were private. And so if there was a problem, he would have warned me, you know, as a young kid, you know, be careful or stay away from this or stay away from that. Floyd says there were people who were uncomfortable. He said, I was up for a job in layout, and the person who was head of layout didn't want me, not because of my talent or lack of talent, but because he was just uncomfortable working with a person of color. And he said, so that hiring thing never went to Walt. Walt never even knew about it, but he said, I got a better job. I got a job in story. So there's a whole chapter debunking that Walt was racist, you know, that Walt hates women. And this is the oddest urban myth I ever heard about Walt. And they even said it on the Ellen DeGeneres show one time. This guy who claimed he was pregnant, whatever. So the myth is that Walt Disney, in his will, said that the first man who gets pregnant or gives birth will get all of his estate or all of Walt Disney World, you know, and so already we should start to see that this seems to be a little flaky since nobody seems to know exactly what that is. But it's so easy to debunk because you go, Walt's will is public information, and you can see there's no comment in there whatsoever. Also, the fact when Walt passed away, half his estate went to Cal Arts. You know, the other half went to the family, and Walt didn't own, you know, Walt Disney World. He didn't own the Disney company. He was just a stockholder. Right. He had a lot of stock, but he didn't own that, so he couldn't give that away. And yet, you know, it's just like the urban myth. If you give birth at Disneyland, the child gets a lifetime pass. Now, there are people who actually believe that, and in my book, Secret Stories of Disneyland, I cover an entire chapter on that of people who've given birth at Disneyland. One woman locked herself in the bathroom, and her husband went to guest relations and said, my wife is about to give birth, and she's locked in this bathroom. And they had to go and yell at her through the door and say, that's just a myth. Your child does not get a lifetime pass. Wow. So that an ambulance came and took her to a hospital where she gave birth. But also in the Call Me Walt book, I have a chapter devoted to each member of Walt's family. So his mother has a chapter, his father has a chapter, each of his brothers has a chapter, his wife has a chapter, his sister has a chapter, his two daughters have a chapter. I have a chapter devoted to Walt as a grandfather. I will tell you the saddest thing. I tried to cram in as much information as I could. And as I said, there is no mention of Mickey Mouse. no mention of the animation studio, no mention of Disneyland, all of that, and I still didn't have room for everything, and the book goes 225 pages.
Wow.
So if you are interested in Walt Disney, and I wonder how many people really are these days, I wonder how many people, especially young people, just think of him as some sort of image,
Right.
like a Colonel Sanders, or a Betty Crocker,
Right.
Either an old man who had no real input into the running of the organization, but his face is on, buckets of chicken and all that, or Betty Crocker, who was absolutely just completely made up,
Right.
But if you're interested, ask Santa. The stocking stuffer you want is Call Me Walt, available on Amazon.com and ThemeParkPress.com. You guys were just so talkative that I couldn't include everything I wanted to say about Mickey Mouse, but you guys are just jabbering away all the time. But I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, because I hope people can sense my passion and enthusiasm for Mickey. And as I said, if you're as enthusiastic about Mickey as I am, pick up the Book of Mouse, the celebration of Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse, or if you want to know about Walt, pick up, Call Me Walt. And, remember, when you're buying these books, I'm an orphan. I was laid off by Disney, so my income comes from, the writing I do and the presentations I do. So fill the Christmas spirit this year, and make sure that little Jimmy Korkis can order a box of C's chocolates, for Christmas Eve here. But thank you guys so much, and thank you so much too for keeping the spirit and the magic, of Disney alive. I think this is very important. I think it's very important to get this information out there, share that information. I do have people come up to me and say that they have heard me on your podcast.
Good.
Then they look so disappointed. No, they say they've enjoyed listening to me, on the podcast, and so I'm very grateful to have this forum. And Disney and Christmas just seem to go together, so well, because some of those values and concepts are so similar,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Faith and hope and kindness. And so this year, let's all walk in the footsteps of Walt, and be a little kinder, be a little bit more patient. Give people a smile, hold open a door.
Right. Absolutely.
Don't blow up while you're waiting in line, while the person in front of you doesn't seem to know what they're doing at all. It's a time of magic, and it's certainly magic listening to this podcast. So I hope people continue to listen to this, so that I'll have a forum in the future, and that you guys will invite me back in the future.
Absolutely. We've got some plans in the future, I think, with you, Jim. We'll talk about that at a later date, but we want to make sure.
Oh my gosh.
That we want to make sure everybody goes out to themeparkpress.com or Amazon.com and look for Jim Korkis and get a copy of all of his books. Your library is not complete until you have a copy of all of Jim's books, because they really are chock full of great information. And there's a lot of different topics that Jim talks about. And we, Tony and I, feel very privileged to call you a friend and to be able to have you on our show.
Well, thank you so much. I feel privileged to consider you guys friends as well. And thank you for letting me ramble on. I hope the listeners enjoy some of that, and I hope they'll also share those stories with others.
It was great. It was a lot of fun. It just kind of blew right by. And I think that's it. Tony, you got anything else to add?
That's it.
And as we like to say around here, we'll see you in the parks.
The Disney Parks Podcast is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. All Disney parks, attractions, lands, shows, event names, etc. are registered trademarks of the Walt Disney Company.
Like a bolt out of the blue, fate steps in and sees you through.